I have always been drawn to the stories that make you check the locks twice. The ones told in hushed tones around late-night fires, or found in creased journals detailing encounters that defy all logic. From whispering ghosts in abandoned hallways to shadowy encounters in quiet woods. These are the tales of terrors that lurk just beyond the edge of our vision. So turn the lights down low and get ready to confront what goes bump in the night. You're listening to Don't Whistle to the Wind. Hello, and welcome in, my little horror fiends, to episode 9 of Don't Whistle to the Wind. On this episode, I'll be reading to you 5 scary night shift nurse stories, so sit back, relax, and enjoy. Story 1. I've been an RN for 2 years, mostly working the 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. on the medical surgical floor of our local hospital in Chicago, Illinois. I've seen a lot of weird things, but nothing prepared me for the hallucination ward on the 4th floor, or a call light in a vacant room that wouldn't stop ringing. We call it the Hollow Unit. It's a section of the hospital that was officially closed for renovations back in 2023. But because we've been chronically over capacity, administration started housing overflow patients there again. It was 1:07 a.m. on a Wednesday. The facility was dead quiet save for the ticking, agonizing wheeze, clack of old ventilators and the occasional hum of a vending machine in the break room. I was drinking a lukewarm coffee at the central nurses station when I saw the main call light console light up. Room 401. I actually checked my staffing sheet twice. Room 401 was meant to be gutted and empty. When I walked down the dim, unrenovated hallway, the air grew noticeably colder. Not hospital AC cold, but a damp, icy cold, like I had just walked into a freezer. The door to 401 was fully opened. I walked in, my pen light cutting through the darkness, expecting to find a confused patient who had wandered in from another unit. The room was completely stripped. There were no beds, no monitors, and no patient. The drywall had been torn down to the wooden studs, leaving pipes exposed. Yet hanging on the right wall, swinging gently from side to side, was a standard call light pendant. The red plastic button was pressed all the way in. I stepped back, my heart beating against my ribs, and reached for the radio on my hip to call security. That's when I heard a raspy, phlegmy voice whisper from the shadows near the exposed pipes. "About time, nurse." I froze, knowing that on a floor without patients, there shouldn't be anyone there. Slowly, I turned my head. Standing in the corner of the room was an old man in a faded floral hospital gown that we hadn't used in years. His skin was waxy, and he wasn't breathing. His chest was completely still. But he was staring at me, eyes entirely devoid of color, and his jaw began to unhinge in what looked like a silent scream. He wasn't on our census, and he certainly wasn't alive. I turned around and I bolted down the hallway, not looking back until I reached the bright lights of the main station. Story 2. I've worked the night shift on a locked, high-acuity psychiatric floor for 5 years, so I'm used to the screaming, bizarre hallucinations patients have, and the occasional thrown tray. But the new protocol they introduced for room 333 is different. We got a new admission 2 weeks ago. A young man, early 20s, transferred from a county facility listed only as a John Doe. He didn't have a chart, just a single handwritten instruction sheet left by the day supervisor, who took an unexpected leave of absence the morning he arrived. The instructions were simple but deeply unsettling. Never make eye contact with him, never speak to him directly, Just do your usual checks, never acknowledge his requests, lock the metal slider door, and do not look back into his room under any circumstances. Quickly move on to the next patient. I was skeptical, but the veterans on the unit were visibly terrified of this guy. On my first 3 shifts, I followed the protocol perfectly. Every night after I locked his room at 3 a.m., I'd hear a low, rhythmic tapping from inside his room, like fingernails rapping against the drywall. But I ignored it, did my rounds, and stayed in the central nursing station until my time was up. It was during my 4th night that my curiosity got the better of me. At 2:43 a.m., the tapping was louder than usual. It didn't sound like fingers on a drywall. It sounded like something cracking and breaking. The hair on my arm stood up, and I crept down the darkened hall to check the door's observation window. I told myself I just wanted to make sure he hadn't hurt himself. The window was smeared with something dark, making it hard to see inside. I took my pen light, clicked it on, and pressed it against the glass to illuminate the room. John Doe wasn't in his bed, so I walked in, concerned at this point that something had happened. I glanced around quickly. He was nowhere to be found. I pulled out my radio to call for backup when I felt watched. The hair on my arm stood up again, and I had this awful feeling to look up. He was on the ceiling directly above me, pressed flat into the corner, his joints bent at an unnatural spider-like angles. His skin was the color of curdled milk, and he was completely hairless. Spider-like eyes that were a black void stared at me, mouth slightly open, leaking saliva as if he was staring at a meal. Which, looking back, he was. I was the meal. Before I could process what I was looking at, he grinned evilly. My penlight beam caught his features, breaking one of the rules. A high-pitched, wet clicking sound echoed through the ceiling tiles. Suddenly, the metal slider door, the one that I was supposed to lock, began to violently vibrate up and down. A voice whispered from above, sounding like sandpaper on dry grass. "I can see you," it hissed, "and I'm starving." I threw open the door and bolted down the hallway, throwing myself into the brightly lit bedroom and slamming the heavy steel door behind me. I could hear his footsteps, heavy, wet thuds, pacing right outside in the hallway. He dragged something heavy along the linoleum that left a sticky trail. I stayed in that bedroom, terrified to move, until the day shift supervisor arrived at 7 a.m. When she walked in, the hall was completely empty. The security footage from the hallway was wiped clean between the hours of 2:58 a.m. and 3:30 a.m. I'm scheduled to go back on duty tonight for a double shift, and management has refused to remove me from 4th floor rotation. I don't know what that thing is or why it's in our facility, but I have a feeling tonight is going to be much worse. Story 3. Every hospital has an off-limits floor, but when I took a night shift assignment on the 6th floor of Viger Health Center to cover a staffing shortage, I quickly learned why. The call bells didn't just ring for normal occurrences, but for vacant rooms as well, and the patients certainly weren't alive. I've worked the graveyard shift for 7 years. I'm used to the flickering fluorescent lights, the beeping monitors, and the specific bone-deep exhaustion that only comes from drinking too much break room coffee and watching the clock tick past 3 a.m. Hospitals at night are eerie, but they're usually just rooted in anxious nerves. But 3 weeks ago, I took a temporary float assignment at the county hospital's Old North Annex. I was assigned to the 6th floor. When I arrived, the daytime nurse in charge gave me a strange, unblinking look. "The call light goes off in room 600. Don't answer it. In fact, don't even go in that hallway." I scoffed. I've seen my fair share of creepy occurrences, but usually it's just a confused patient in a shared room or an old person wandering down the hallway. I'm a nurse. My job is to help people. I figured she was just being dramatic or superstitious. My first 2 nights were perfectly fine. Just the standard routines, dispensing meds, and doing rounds. But by night 3, the isolation started to get to me. The North Annex was built in the 1980s, and it showed. The hospital renovated it years ago, but the halls were still impossibly long, and the air always smelled of damp concrete. Around 4:15 a.m., I was sitting at the nurses' station updating charts. The 6th floor was entirely vacant, except for one patient in room 602. An elderly gentleman named Mr. Eris, who was sleeping soundly. Suddenly, the digital console on my desk let out a shrill, piercing beep. A call light was flashing. I looked up, my heart doing a little flip. The illuminated number above the console read, room 600. My breath hitched in my throat. Room 600 was the room at the very end of the hall, the one the day nurse warned me about. It had been officially empty for 7 years due to a trauma patient who died a horrible death, all because the wiring faulted, making her call light and the medical equipment fail. Her nurse had found her deceased hours later while walking her rounds. The hospital never got around to fixing the wiring in the room, and the door was supposed to be locked. I grabbed my pen light and walked down the dim corridor. Every light in the hallway flickered as I passed, plunging me in and out of temporary darkness. When I reached the door of room 600, the sign, "Danger, keep out," was on the floor a couple feet away, and the door was standing wide open, shedding a pale, unnatural blue light into the hallway. I shone my flashlight into the room. It was supposed to be completely gutted, no beds, no monitors, just peeling wallpaper and the exposed wiring. And yet, sitting directly in the center of the empty room, an old hospital bed with an old-fashioned IV pole was hooked up to a plastic bag filled with a thick, dark, tar-like substance. Beneath it, the IV line was attached to a woman who was sitting on the bed. Her back was to me. She wore an old, faded hospital gown, and her hair was matted with red streaks. "Ma'am," I called out, my voice trembling, but professional. "You aren't supposed to be on this floor. Let me get you back to the main unit." The woman was eerily still, the silence in the room making my ears ring. Slowly, impossibly, she twisted her neck a full 180 degrees to look at me, her face gaunt, eyes fully white, frowning. She opened her mouth and let out a warped, pain-filled scream that vibrated the floorboards beneath my feet. I didn't think twice. I turned and ran. I sprinted down that hallway faster than I ever thought possible, my nursing clogs clacking against the linoleum. I burst through the heavy fire doors back to the safety of the nurses' station, slammed the heavy metal door shut, and locked it. I was breathing heavily, shaking with adrenaline. When I looked back at the call light console, the light for room 600 was still on, but it was behaving strangely now. Instead of just glowing, it was flashing in perfect sync with the fast, rhythmic beeps of a flatline. I grabbed the phone to call security, but before the operator could answer, the call light went off. The console went completely silent. Just as I let out a breath of relief, the overhead paging system in the empty annex clicked on. Static hissed through the speakers for a long, agonizing second. Then, a voice that sounded like static and whispers spoke out loud into the empty ward. "Nurse urgently needed. In 600. I didn't stay to finish my shift. I ran to the stairwell, fled to the administrative office and refused to go back to that annex. I'm putting in my formal resignation tomorrow morning. No amount of overtime or shift differentials is worth spending another minute on the 6th floor. If you've ever worked the night shift in an old, isolated hospital, you know exactly what I mean when I say some things never leave. Story 4. I was given the list on my very first orientation night. The previous night nurse, an exhausted woman named Elena, was transferring to day shift and handed me her badge with trembling hands. "You are required to read these every night before your shift," she stated. I thought she was trying to be funny, a seasoned nurse messing with a naive graduate. But even with the amount of annoyance I had from feeling like I'm a part of some hazing prank, I begrudgingly looked at the list. Here is what it said. Rule number 1. Never answer the call light for room 212. The room was being renovated, but 3 workers have died in that room with unknown causes of death. So the hospital closed it off permanently. No one should be in that room. Rule 2. At exactly 3:03 a.m., the elevators in the East Wing will open. Do not step inside or press any buttons. Step backwards and close your eyes until you hear the doors close. Then slowly turn around and walk away. Rule 3. If a patient asks for their medicine, but their eyes are completely lifeless looking, do not give them their pills. Do not touch them to check their vitals, or you will take their place in the bed. Rule 4. Do not acknowledge the tall male orderly in the Navy scrubs. There are no male orderlies on the night shift. Rule 5. If you smell sulfur coming from the stairwell during your rounds, leave the area immediately. Do not finish your rounds and go back to the nurse's station. Rule 6. You will hear scratching behind the medication dispensing machine. Ignore it, do not investigate, grab meds, and leave. Last night was my 3rd week on the floor, and it started routinely enough. I was charting at the central desk, drinking a stale cup of coffee. The fluorescent lights flickered in the hallway, which is normal for this old wing, but then things got completely out of hand. At 3 a.m., the call light for room 212 started blinking. I was confused and admittedly startled by the high-pitched noise. The room was closed off, I thought. No longer in use. But probably faulty wiring, I told myself. I tried to ignore it, but the light stayed on, glowing a harsh, aggressive red. I walked to the break room to pour myself another cup of coffee, trying to occupy my mind with rule number 3. But my anxiety got the better of me. I grabbed my flashlight and marched down to the decommissioned room. I needed to see if a squatter was in the room, or if a confused patient had wandered in. The door to room 12 was shockingly, slightly ajar. I cautiously pushed it open with the side of my foot. The room was freezing, the air thick with a smell I couldn't place, but it burned my nose. There was no one in the bed, but the bathroom door was wide open, revealing an impossibly dark void that seemed to swallow the beam of my flashlight. Then, a voice rasped from the darkness of the bathroom. It didn't sound human. "Hello, nurse. I've been waiting for you to come check on me." I froze, the flashlight shaking violently in my hands. I remembered Elena's terrified face. I shouldn't be here. I took a step back, went to turn and leave, but the door slammed shut right in my face and the lock clicked in soon after, trapping me in the room. I felt dizzy, my vision blurring in and out. The ceiling seemed to drop lower, suffocating me. Suddenly, I felt a hand on my shoulder, ice cold and impossibly heavy. Goosebumps began racing across my skin, and my blood ran cold. I was paralyzed with fear, but my piercing 4 a.m. shift break alarm blared from my pager in my pocket. The spell had broken. My vision returned and I stumbled backward, clumsily throwing my weight against the empty air, and suddenly fell out into the hallway. The door to room 212 slammed shut behind me with a violent boom. I didn't look back. I ran to the nurse's station, locking myself in. I watched the clock until the day shift arrived at 7 a.m., my hands still shaking so hard I could barely type my final notes. I requested a shift change to day shift but was immediately denied, as my supervisor informed me that I had to be employed over 6 months before I could request any kind of shift change. I was coming up on my 6th month working here, counting down the days, but it had seemed like the activity was ramping up more each week, as if aware that I was leaving soon. I stupidly forgot the rules, my mind too focused on what little days I had left. On my very last night shift, hurriedly trying to do my rounds and charting, I messed up big time. Lost in thought, I mistakenly looked directly at the tall male orderly, making direct eye contact. His eyes, black voids, arms and legs elongated even more, bending unnaturally, putting him on all fours. I watched in horror as his jaw unhinged, showing rows upon rows of razor-sharp teeth. I turned and bolted. Whatever the abomination was, let out the highest ear-pitching screech I had ever heard, then chased after me. I found the nearest utility closet and shut myself inside, stupidly thinking I was safe. But it found me, and it has been trying to bust down the door, then pacing like a rabid animal between each attempt. There will be no need for a shift change if I die, no need to even ask for one. Pray for me that morning comes quick, and if it gets to me before then, I'm typing this out just in case on my phone for anyone who may find it, so the next person who takes the night shift follows the rules more seriously than I did. Our 5th and final story. I worked the night shift at a community hospital where I quickly learned that the most terrifying thing isn't a patient flatlining. It's the things that answer when nobody is supposed to be there. After tonight, I am never answering a phantom call light ever again. The night shift on Med Surge is an exercise in controlled chaos, but the 3 a.m. hour is universally known as the graveyard hour, for a reason. Vitals drop, delirium sets in, and the long, sterile hallways usually settle into a heavy, artificial silence. I was working a double shift, covering the entire 4th floor by myself. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the central monitor at my desk lit up. Room 407, call light. I sighed, grabbing my clipboard and pushing off my rolling chair, completely forgetting that room 407 had been empty since the previous afternoon. The patient was a sweet elderly woman who had passed away peacefully around 2 p.m., and the room had been terminally cleaned by 5 p.m. The admission desk hadn't called us about a possible new transfer, so it should have been locked up tight. As I walked down the dim, fluorescent lit corridor, I noticed the air getting progressively colder. By the time I reached the heavy oak door of 407, it felt like I was stepping outside in a blizzard. The air was freezing, and the room's main lights were completely off. But the little green LED light on the call button module was glowing, solid, and steady. I pushed open the door. The room, however, wasn't empty. Sitting rigidly on the edge of the freshly made, unoccupied bed was an old woman in a standard-issue hospital gown. She wasn't one of my patients. I had never seen her before in my life. Her skin was a terrifying waxy shade of gray, and her eyes were squeezed tightly shut as if she were enduring a blinding light. But it was her hands that made my stomach drop. She was meticulously picking at the stitches of a surgical drain on her own body. "Ma'am," I whispered, my fingers tightening on my clipboard. "You aren't supposed to be in this room. Let me get you to a wheelchair and take you back to the main desk so we can find out which unit you belong to." She didn't move. She didn't even look up at me. She just kept plucking at the stitches on her stomach with a frantic, violent intensity. I took a tentative step into the room, reaching out to gently guide her by the arm. As soon as I closed the distance, the temperature plunged even further. I could see my own breath puffing out in the dark. Suddenly, she stopped plucking at her skin. The room grew deathly quiet, so quiet that I could hear the loud thump, thump, thump of my own heart in my ears. Agonizingly slowly, the woman tilted her head toward me. Her neck made a sickening, wet, cracking sound, like a bundle of breaking twigs. When she finally opened her eyes, they were completely solid white, without a single trace of an iris or pupil. A wide, unnatural smile stretched across her gray face, splitting her lips in ways human skin shouldn't allow. "Well, are you going to help me?" the woman mockingly asked. Her voice didn't sound like it came from her throat. It sounded like dry leaves scraping against concrete. "Why won't you help me? The stitches, they need to come out." She spoke as she tore through them, blood streaming down her stomach, pulling on the ground around her feet. I stood frozen in terror, my flashlight trembling in my hand. Then, she lunged. She moved faster than anyone in her condition physically should, springing off the bed with a grotesque, inhuman agility. I barely managed to throw myself backward into the hallway, grabbing the door handle and slamming it shut behind me. I fell onto the linoleum, scrambling backward on my heels. From the other side of the heavy door, I heard 3 slow but deliberate knocks. Knock, knock, knock. That was enough for me. I didn't stick around and scrambled to my feet, sprinting to the central nursing station, locking myself in the secure charting room. I didn't care about protocol, and I didn't care anymore about the empty rooms. I barricaded the door and called the house supervisor, locking every single point of entry to the unit. We never found the woman. When security searched room 407, it was perfectly empty, the bed immaculately made, and the call light unplugged from the wall. I have since transferred to another hospital. Sometimes, though, during my shifts, when I'm sitting in the charting room, I hear those 3 deliberate, menacing knocks right outside the door. That is all I have for you, and I hope you enjoyed these scary night shift nurse stories. Until next time. You've been listening to Don't Whistle to the Wind, and as the tale ends, the candles have burned down to nothing, and the salt lines we drew have surely failed as the shadows have crept in. Don't let them catch you, and don't turn off the light.